It's not outlandish to assume that Nintendo is probably sick and tired of their stuff getting leaked. Anyone who works on a project in secret and then has it revealed to their audience before it's ready would likely be upset. Imagine planning a surprise party for your best friend who actually, believe it or not, loves surprise parties, who receives a text message with a rundown of the entire party and everyone who's gonna be there from an unknown number, then followed up by a picture of a surprisingly intelligent looking Waddle Dee. While Nintendo has had issues with their games and general products getting leaked in years prior, I don't know if you noticed, but almost nothing seemed to be leaked from the April 2nd Nintendo Switch 2 Direct. And I feel I have a small idea as to why that may be. Not the entire explanation, but a little thing that I can't get it out of my head. I'm Zian from Nintendo Life, and as many of you probably already know, I was in New York at the beginning of April for the Nintendo Switch 2 experience, but on a special media day that was actually hosted prior to the regular event. At the start of the event, we were shuffled into the entrance of the Switch 2 experience for check-in, where we were all greeted by this seemingly unofficial image of Mario from the cover of Mario Galaxy. I still have no idea why that was there. If you were at the experience and you saw something different on that screen, please let me know in the comments down below or contact me. Then we were taken up an elevator many floors above the main event area where we had the chance to sit down and watch the Nintendo Direct with a load of other Nintendo executives and journalists. We weren't allowed to take photos or video in that room, but what I can say is that they had Switch 2 branding up on the screens. There wasn't anything about any new video games, any even hints really, beyond just some Nintendo music playing over the loudspeakers in the room. In the last hour before the Direct though, I spoke with a few other journalists about what they thought might be in the Direct, or even what they had hoped for. And I actually had one journalist in specific tell me that they felt that this was the true time for Earthbound. And that journalist, it wasn't me, it was actually someone else. I talked to a few other people who were sure that the next 3D Mario was going to be shown off. Someone else even mentioned Dr. Mario at one point. Genuinely, it seemed like no one in the room knew what we were about to see on screen. All of us were truly left wondering, but it was also a wonderful thing to experience. We were in this sort of little bubble, this time capsule, as many of you were probably watching at home. The Direct came and went, the time flew by so fast, and one thing I realized as the time went on was how surprised everyone was about each of the different game reveals. We learned so much about Mario Kart World, got the first look at Donkey Kong Bonanza, a new FromSoft game called Duskbloods, Game Chat, Mario Party Jamboree Switch 2, Metroid Prime 4 running at 120 FPS, GameCube NSO, Cyberpunk, and even Kirby Air Riders. Almost none of this was on our Nintendo Life bingo cards, and we didn't see a bunch of people speculating and spoiling these things online for unnecessary recognition either. It really seemed like only the people at Nintendo who needed to know this stuff for their jobs were the people that were in the know. And that really was fantastic. Especially after all of the Nintendo Switch 2 hardware leaks, it was great to see Nintendo manage to keep so much of this show a secret. At an event like E3, you'll often see big posters, signs, and inflatables hanging from the ceiling, statues and photo ops to promote games. But here at the media event for the Switch 2 experience, everything was decked out with red colors and Switch 2 branding almost exclusively. There were marquees hanging above each demo station, much like you'd find in an arcade cabinet, showing off what each game station had up for play, but there weren't any printed instruction cards for the demos, no promo pins, stickers, or anything to hand out, except for some Switch 2 stuff like this backpack. I got a pencil case, a few stickers, and a Moleskine notebook. A lot of you remember the Grinch leak, right? And how that was debunked a long time ago as being fake. Well, the concept of a leak on that level makes sense. The story there was that someone was working at a print shop that was hired by Nintendo, and they were sharing photos of stuff that they were printing surrounding Super Smash Bros. That they weren't supposed to be sharing. They likely signed some kind of important NDA, and they were definitely breaking it by sharing any of this. Now, as I mentioned, the Grinch leak was not actually a real thing, but stuff like that can definitely still happen. So what if Nintendo didn't have to work with print shops anymore to help with the creation of their marketing material? What if they didn't just have to trust people outside of their company to hold on to their secrets? What if they could just control all of that themselves? Wouldn't Nintendo want to do that? I think so. So one thing that I noticed at the Switch 2 experience were the marquees that were decorating the demo kiosks. At a quick glance, those probably just look like your typical Translate posters that you see in movie theaters or at restaurants for menus behind the counter. But if you've been to a fast food chain like McDonald's or Taco Bell in a while, you may have noticed that even in the drive-thru, they don't use those plastic posters anymore. They often use screens because it's probably more cost effective to just digitally update the menus whenever something changes. And then they don't have to have an employee go out there and swap them out and ship the materials to every single store. They can just have complete control of it theoretically at all times. This is a moment that I wish I would have captured. I wish I would have zoomed in on them, taken high quality photos or something, or messed with the frame rate to see if I could get it to flicker or something. But the quality of those images above were so high that I have a feeling that those were actually screens. And that meant that Nintendo could upload the images directly to it. They could change out kiosks on the fly. If they wanted to change up the number of demo stations they had on one side of the room versus the other, they could do that easily. And they could also limit who actually knows about these games. Then Nintendo wouldn't have to worry about a disgruntled employee stealing a poster or showing it to somebody that wasn't supposed to see it, or maybe them seeing it on accident as something's being carried into the event center. Even at the London event that Alex and more of our crew went to, they actually didn't even use those marquees. They actually just had giant TV screens hanging above each section to show off what games were in what areas. And nobody was wearing Donkey Kong Bonanza t-shirts. Nobody was handed any cool game exclusive merchandise. The game demo stations did seem to have little instruction cards per game, but they were still very minimalistic. Now I realize that this isn't the only way that information about Nintendo games or just video games in general can leak. It's not just from public events. We've seen time and time again in the past where even for previous Nintendo Directs, a bunch of information gets leaked, or a State of Play or Microsoft showcases as well. But take the most recent Nintendo Direct before the Switch 2 Direct. How many of you knew that Rhythm Heaven or Tomodachi Life was coming back, that those games were getting a revival in the Direct? Maybe I'm just out of the loop, but I had no idea, and I'm thankful for that. Maybe by tightening all these little pipes, Nintendo is truly finding a way to keep this information internal until it doesn't need to be anymore. And on one hand, I'm kind of bummed about this. I loved the days of E3 when Nintendo would go all out decorating their booth with fun signage and things to interact with. It made being at the event more of a memorable experience, like you were teleported to a theme park, especially with the Breath of the Wild booth at E3 2016. Imagine if at the Switch 2 experience, the Donkey Kong Bonanza area was decorated like a jungle or a mine, or if the Metroid Prime 4 Beyond demo let us sit in a miniature version of Samus's airship. Sure, all of that is quite unnecessary. Really, all we need to see are the games. You know, that's what we'll all be playing at home when the games finally come out, or on the go, wherever we decide to play them, since the Switch 2 is thankfully portable still. But I remember the days when I was a kid, when I would read magazines like Game Informer and Game Now. This was one of my favorites. And I would see photos from Space World, Tokyo Game Show, from CES, and from E3, importantly. And I always dreamed of getting to go there. So I hope Nintendo isn't suddenly trying to scale back their public events and make them less flashy than they once were because of leaks. I think the marquee thing is just a simple way for them to kind of control their information, and I hope it's not something that they're considering when it comes to the entire presentation of the event. Nintendo had big screens all over the event floor with footage from the Direct and some of the upcoming games that they have. But there weren't any cool statues or standees or people walking around dressed up like Donkey Kong or Samus. Obviously, this was a different kind of event, but I hope the concept of leaks hasn't muffled that for Nintendo, because I imagine that's probably a big way that information gets out there when Nintendo doesn't want it to. But ultimately, I'm really thankful and just happy that a lot of us got to see the Switch 2 Direct without anything spoiled. It was a real mystery. And while this seems like a tiny piece of the puzzle, maybe this isn't even an important thing when it comes to leaks. It feels like a change Nintendo has made, the industry is making. And was this video necessarily necessary? I don't know, you be the judge. But I've had this thing in my head for the past few weeks, and I'm thankful that you're also just indulging me and here to listen. So let us know in the comments down below if you were surprised at all by the first Nintendo Switch 2 Direct. If any of the games really caught you off guard, if one of your friends did leak something to you because their Uncle Nintendo knew something. Probably not. But let me know how the Direct hit you and how you feel about leak culture in general. And as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos like this, then why don't you patch up the leak on that subscribe button by giving it a good old click, and then ring that notification bell to be notified whenever we put up new videos like this. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm Xian from Nintendo Life. Stay safe out there, and we will see you all next time.